welcome one and all to Sermon Time, where I am your host, Pastor Tony. Today we're going to launch our new mini-series on our Bible Lands tour, looking at the parables, the stories that Jesus told. Parables are a special kind of story. They are stories that are full of symbols, and the symbols mean something, kind of like an object lesson or a fable. Aesop's story about the tortoise and the hare isn't really about turtles and rabbits. It means something that pertains to human life. It's the same with parables. Usually the symbols of Jesus' parables are explained in the text, but other times their meaning is implied. And in today's parable, the meaning is implied. So to get to the meaning, we will have to study the story carefully and do a little digging in the Bible and in the historical context to get the point Jesus was trying to make. So I'm titling today's parable, One Happy Marriage, One Sad Man. And we're looking at a story Jesus told in Matthew 22, verses 1 to 14. Let's start by reading the story. And Jesus answered and spoke to them again by parables and said, "The kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who arranged a marriage for his son and sent out his servants to call those who were invited to the wedding, and they were not willing to come. Again, he set out other servants, saying, 'Tell those who are invited, see, I've prepared my dinner, my oxen, my fatted calf are killed, and all things are ready. Come to the wedding.' But they made light of it and went their ways, one to his own farm, another to his business. And the rest seized his servants, treated them spitefully, and killed them. But when the king heard about it, he was furious, and he sent out his armies, destroyed those murderers, and burned up their city. Then he said to his servants, 'The wedding is ready, but those who were invited are not worthy. Therefore go into the highways, and as many as you find, invite to the wedding.' So those servants went out into the highways and gathered together all whom they found, both bad and good. And the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to see the guests, he saw a man there who did not have on a wedding garment. So he said to him, 'Friend, how did you come in here without a wedding garment?' And he was speechless. Then the king said to the servants, 'Bind him hand and foot, take him away and cast him into outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are called, but few are chosen.'" Let's talk about this parable, shall we? To start with, it's important to recognize there are two basic parts to the story, right? There's the invitation to the wedding, the happy part, right? It's a happy wedding. And then there is the part about the wedding garment. And this is where we meet the really sad man. And apparently, what one does with the invitation and the garment is very important to Jesus. Let's start with the invitation. So the king is putting on this huge wedding for his son. Any wedding is a big deal in Israeli culture, but a prince's wedding is a bigger deal still. It's a happy event. A prince's wedding should elicit a resounding, joyful thought throughout the realm. His marriage signals the perpetuity of the kingdom, the peace of the people. Not only has this little man grown up to one day take over the realm from his father, but now he too can produce the offspring that will prolong the kingdom even further. So to celebrate, the king invites his preferred list of guests, and he commissions messengers to deliver the invitations. But as Jesus' parable goes, those who were invited rejected the invitation. Twice. Not only did they make light of it and went their own ways, they mistreated and killed the messengers. This, of course, infuriates the king, and he sends out his armies to destroy their city, passing judgment on them. He called them murderers. Still, not enough guests for the wedding, the king comes up with plan B. Increase the guest list. So, with list in hand, he sends out his servants a third time to invite as many as you find, both good and bad. So, if the servants carry out this expressed wish of their king, in the end, who gets invited to the wedding? Everybody. Pause for dramatic effect. If goosebumps are not forming on your skin right now, then I need to do a little splaining. We're not talking here about a king and his son's wedding. This is a parable, and the elements of the parable mean something. Jesus started his parable with the words, "The kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who arranged a wedding for his son." As in all his parables, Jesus is telling us something about his kingdom, the kingdom of heaven. The king here is God, and the son getting married is Jesus. The bride, well, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Jesus' parable is talking about how people get into heaven, how they become a member of his kingdom. People, good and bad, receive an invitation. They respond to the invitation. And as we will see in just a second, they must fit themselves for the kingdom they are heading to by putting on a wedding garment. So it isn't, as so many have put it, a matter of being good enough for heaven. Heaven is not offered only to good people. Heaven is offered to everyone, good and bad. Are you alive? Somewhere between good and bad? Then you're invited. Invited to consider another reality. Invited to head in a new direction. The question is not, am I good enough? The question is, will I respond to the invitation? Now, having said that, responding to the invitation is a great start, but it's not the entire race. You may recall how in Jesus' parable, one person showed up to the wedding without a wedding garment. You remember that part, right? This shows the absolute necessity of wearing one. Without it, no one passes the inspection of the king. You and I, if we want to be in the kingdom of God, must put on the garment. So what does that mean? What does the wedding garment represent? First, let's start with the difference between everyday clothes and a wedding garment, shall we? Wedding garments are not just made. You don't just go to the store and buy your wedding outfit. Wedding garments are tailored, crafted, made to exacting standards. These images of a famous Israeli rabbi who also tailors clothes illustrate the difference well. He fashions his garments with precision. It takes time, and he pays attention to details. It takes a lot of work, but the result is stunning. When we visited Israel, evidences of these fine craftsmen abounded in the marketplace around Jerusalem, just like in ancient times. Of course, you can find clothing that was made everywhere, but to be really outfitted, you need a tailor. The SDA Bible commentary makes the point that in ancient times, when common people were invited to a royal wedding, they were provided a garment by the king. This is not stated in Jesus' parable, and because of this, other commentators conclude this point is either fraudulent, inaccurate, or irrelevant. But I personally think this is the point, and it is exactly, absolutely accurate. One guest was provided the garment made by the king, and he refused to put it on. While he responded to the invitation to enter heaven, he did nothing to prepare himself for it. He came clothed, but he didn't come clothed in the garment provided. This is alluded to in Jesus' words elsewhere. In his testimony to John in the book of Revelation, Jesus tells us that the wedding garment worn at heaven's banquet is provided. Here's the verse. Let us be glad and rejoice and give him glory, for the marriage of the Lamb is come, and his wife has made herself ready. And to her it was granted to be arrayed in fine linen, clean and bright, for the fine linen is the righteous acts of the saints. Here the symbol of the wedding garment is explained. It represents the righteous acts of the saints. Now, to the hasty, there are two parts of this passage that would seem to indicate that the preparations for the marriage banquet was something the saints were responsible to perform. One, it says they made themselves ready. And two, the garments represent their righteous deeds. Jesus says this right in the text. But while these statements are true in that they did make themselves ready, and they did so by putting on the garment or the righteous deeds, nothing could be farther from the truth that their fitness for heaven, their wedding garment, resulted from their works. If we have concluded that the only people who make it to heaven do so on the basis of their own actions and the merits of their own righteousness, we would have missed the point of the message Jesus was presenting. For while it is true the bride made herself ready and her garments represent her righteousness, the gladness and joy they express is directed toward God in verse 7, not them. It is a very happy marriage because of what God did for them. In verse 8, Jesus chooses his words very carefully when he identifies the source of his bride's garment. He says, "It was granted her to be arrayed in fine linen." In other words, her garment, her righteousness, was granted to her. It was given to her. And who granted her this fine garment, this perfect righteousness? You quickly say, God did, and you would be right. For we know this as a matter of fact because Jesus used the passive voice for the words, was granted. It was granted her to be arrayed in fine linen, clean and bright. And what do you know about passive voice verbs when the actor is not named? It is a divine passive, meaning God is the one giving this garment to his bride. So while it's true she needs to put it on, and it's true it represents her righteousness, it is also true that it was a gift from God himself. It's all about his grace, not about our works. There's a huge difference between putting on a garment and making one. Getting dressed in our garments, putting on our own righteousness, is like showing up at the prince's wedding dressed as a common peasant. We aren't going to make it into that place. What makes this a happy wedding is that God provides both the invitation and the fitness. Putting this thought back into Jesus' parable in Matthew 22, you have a guest who was granted a royal wedding garment representing the king's righteousness, provided to him free of charge, qualifying him to be in the presence of the king, by right of his invitation and by merit of his righteous character seen on his guest. This garment was required to take part in the festivities of the wedding, but he refused to put it on. There is no work involved in putting on a garment. The work is in affording it. The work is in designing it, and crafting it, and delivering it, and selling it, and putting it on. And if the garment of God represents his righteous deeds and his character, then wearing it represents that his character has been assimilated into our life. Have you ever met a professed Christian who didn't reflect to you or others a Christ-like character? Jesus here is talking about people like that. These are the ones he referred to as being without the wedding garment. They have responded to the invitation. Maybe they've been baptized, but they haven't yet formed the character. They are in the church, perhaps, but not yet in the kingdom. And as Jesus points out, if this persists right up to the day of the wedding, these will be bound hand and foot and thrown into outer darkness. In other words, they're rejected by the king. Friends, no, not only are we called to be in heaven, we are called to its fitness. Both the invitation and the garment are required, and both are offered as unmerited gifts. Even though the invitation is freely made, we must respond to it. And even though the garment is so richly provided, we must put it on. It all comes down to choices on our part. Which will it be for you? A happy marriage with the king who invited you and fit you to live in his household? Or a sad man, rejected because he was unwilling to change? If you want the happy wedding party, you're going to have to respond to his invitation and agree to some radical character transformation. You're going to have to become less like yourself and more like him. How sad, utterly sad, if we come to the end of invitation after invitation to ready ourselves for heaven. And when heaven finally arrives, we are just like we have always been, unfit, malformed, half-baked. When all along, the way it could have been completely different. We could have been making these changes day in and day out, but we didn't. And when the King comes to enjoy the wedding of his son to his bride, us, and we aren't ready, what a sad day that is going to be. You see, we aren't just his honored guests at this event. You and I are his bride. So don't put off your preparation. Don't neglect your fitness. If you do, you will create in the heart of God the most intense agony. Or you can right now bring him the greatest, most intense joy by readying yourself for your marriage to him. If I could snap my fingers and fit you for heaven, I would do it. But you and I know it doesn't work that way. That's just going down to the market and picking up some random clothes. Each day, there are decisions that we have to make. Each one represents a potential moral victory or a potential moral defeat, another stitch in the garment. Each stitch becomes a hem, and hems become sleeves and necklines and collars. And keep this up, and in the end, you will have the crafted garment. We must learn that our decisions produce actions, and our repeated actions form habits. And the sum of our habits produce character. And our characters, well, they determine our destiny. No one else can decide or act or form habitual character or determine destiny for us. Only we can do that. The good news is, if we ask in each of these instances and on each of those days, in every decision, we ask for victory, we ask for his righteousness, we ask for a character like his to be formed in us, we will always receive the request we ask. He will always answer that prayer in the affirmative. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, he once said, for they shall be filled. You know these words, or at least I hope you do. I need to be certain you understand them. The people Jesus is describing here are devoid of righteousness. They have none. They are hungry and thirsty for it, suggesting they are empty of it, not full of it. They bring their hunger and thirst for righteousness to the only one they know who can provide it, God. And Jesus says, they shall be filled. They don't fill themselves with righteousness. They are filled with righteousness. Another divine passive, another record that this is something only God can do for us. Come to him empty, leave him filled. They then use those calories they've just consumed by living out that righteousness in the world that they inhabit. Their family, their friends, their associates at work and neighbors all around can see they are no longer empty, but full of good things. And they begin to wonder, if God did that for them, can he do that for me? And our answer will be, of course. Not only does their world take notice, but apparently God does too. He's the final judge here. Pass his inspection, and you're in. How many people I know who are wearing their own clothes in preparation for the king's banquet? I can see it. I can see their neglect of Jesus' instructions. I experience their refusal to put on the righteous qualities of the king. Their bad habits are perpetuated and their nasty characters deepened. And I would just say, while it isn't my job to judge, and thank God it isn't my job to judge, it is his job. And if they can't pass my inspection, how will they ever pass his? Friends, Jesus didn't tell this story in order to keep people from entering the kingdom. The opposite is true. He told us this parable because he wants everyone there. good and bad, worthy and unworthy. He wants us all. He wants you and he wants me there. The king is kind of weird because not only is he king, he is also tailor. He invites us to his home and he personally sees to it, like a master craftsman, that we become fit for that place. That's why he told this parable, so that no one would be caught unaware, so that everyone could know what's required and be prepared, so that we would be assured of what he is doing to guarantee we arrive there. He has invited you. The invitation is in his hand, and that hand is extended towards you. Take it. Respond to his invitation with a resounding, I accept. I'll see you there. He also has a garment that he prepared just for you. It's ready. He's offering it to you today, right now, in my hearing. It's on the hanger, ready to go, yours for the taking, to have, to wear, to live clothed in his righteousness. Excuse my language, but dang it, put the thing on, and I will see you in the kingdom. Till next week, God bless you all.